I can see the 4 building blocks of the good developer experience in the project. So first is the stability. I can imagine every one of you could get mad if the changes you just pulled from the master makes your app crash. Your code has to also have a nice functionalities. It means writing a useful components, utilities, and the middlewares. But to make these tools usable for others, you should consider making them as easy to use as you can. You have to remember that not everyone is thinking the same way you do. Which leads us to the last part, the clarity. Make sure your code base is readable, and remember, it's much more important to have the code base clean than to use some dirty hack which gives you a minor performance benefits, but nobody except you understands it. Yeah, this is a good start, but it's much more than this. You still have to remember to cooperate with your QA team, and it's not always the easiest thing in the world. Also, review each other's code. CRs are really important, but it's also important not to feel offended by the reviewers and discuss the best solutions, even with the team members with the lesser experience. And of course, to use the nice tools around the app. And today, I will try to highlight some of my favorite technologies, which helps us on the daily basis. First thing is GraphQL. Probably most of you already tried it in your project. Honestly, I feel like working with GraphQL against the REST API is just a big win. You can write the queries and ask exactly for the things you need. Like on this example, please just give me the ID, background color, opacity, the crest, and the name. And you have it. And if you want to send some data to the server, you just make a mutation and let the resolvers on the backend side take care of it. It seems very nice in theory, but how it plays with React Native? The answer is simple, perfect. Thanks to the amazing library you've already heard about, called React Apollo. Of course, it's not the only solution on the market, but I will try to show you why I love it so much. So React Apollo together with GraphQL tag provides you a nice higher order component or component-based API. You can tell your component when to fetch some data, and it injects nice props like a loading, error, and finally the data with all the things you asked for. And you just take care of rendering the component on the screen. Yeah. I already told you a bit about the Apollo, but it's much more than this. Apollo itself, it's easy, composable, universal, understandable, and extensible. And if you remember the previous chart, it just meets all of the good developer experience requirements. And besides that, it has an amazing plugin system. And speaking of plugins, you can control them to handle things like persistence, caching, HTTP handling, etc. But my favorite one is something Sarah already told you about, the state management, thanks to the amazing plugin called Apollo Link State. You know, managing data from external API is simple with Apollo Client. But besides that, most of the apps need some client-side data to handle the user interactions. With Apollo Link State, you can just write your resolvers on the client side and store some data in here. No matter if you want to use use runtime or some kind of local storages. After everything is set up, you can use that simple queries and mutations in your components. It turns out that you don't need Redux or Mobex at all. And I can tell you that it cuts a lot of boilerplate code you need to write with other state managers. The next thing is a tool you might not have heard about yet, but it's one of my favorite. It's called Whole, and it's developed by my friends from Callstack. What is it? Basically, the replacement for the Metro bundler, which is the standard React Native packager. It uses Webpack under the hood, and it's really nice since it allows you to use some amazing Webpack plugins you already know from the web development, and also create things like aliases. Basically, you can recreate most of your Webpack environment in your React Native project. Installation and usage is really simple. You just add the module as regular dependency, then run whole init, and you are all set. Now is the time to use the start or bundle commands, depends on your needs of starting the development server or bundling your app for production. Picking a good tools can save you a lot of time. I strongly recommend you to check out mentioned technologies and try them in your next project. Of course, if it's possible and if it fits your needs. Besides the tools, there is still of work to be done by developer, but some of this work is repetitive and could be automated. That's where the continuous integration and continuous deployment systems step in. You can save a lot of time automating some processes and letting the machine do the job. After all, this is what our work is about. Our greatest automation ally is CircleCI, or actually any platform that allows you to build the app like Travis or even Mac Mini standing in the office. I personally prefer Circle due to amazing GitHub integration and easiness of use. Setting up the proper environment isn't that hard, but might require a certain level of understanding the platform. It's all about the nature and architecture of React Native. The app exists in two realms, JavaScript and the native. They are communicating through the bridge and work along each other. But to run the test, you can separate them. Let's start from creating the JS environment. It's quite simple. You can just pick the right Docker image from predefined CircleCI images. It's called Node. And you can choose the version of Node you want your JS to be executed on. After setting up JS environment, we can start working with the native part. If you are using CircleCI 2.0, you can pick a Mac machine and choose the version of Xcode which is installed on it. I recommend you going for the latest one, and at the moment it's 9.3. The last but not least is Android environment. It might be tricky to set up every piece of software that is required by Android by yourself. And that's why I recommend you searching GitHub for Firewire/React Native Docker image. It has almost all the stuff you need for running Android into your machine. If something is missing, there is a Pacman installed, which helps you find the desired dependencies. Yeah, after all environments are set up, we can start automating the things. And what do I mean by automation? I already mentioned that code reviews are very important. However, we can't forget that we are only humans, and it's hard for us to track every small issue in somebody's code. That's why we have computers which can check our code quality. The first check is something you already know and probably use on a daily basis. Module is called ESLint, and it checks the styling of your code. You can specify what patterns do you want to follow and reject the PR if, in example, you have unused imports or something. If you don't want to set up all the rules by yourself, I strongly recommend you going for ESLint preset callstack.io, since it follows great patterns for React Native and also has a nice, prettier integration. The second one we do is type checking. You can add static typing support by adding Flow to your project. React Native init comes with Flow config embedded into your project, so in most cases, it's just a matter of installing the Flow bin dependency. It's nice and simple. Even if your code base is not typed yet, you can start adding the Flow annotation and typing your files one by one. So incremental adoption, it's really nice here. Another thing which is very helpful regarding the quality of the app are the unit tests. Having a well-tested code base with high test coverage helps you fetch a lot of bugs in development process. TDD is a very popular paradigm. If you only have enough time and resources, you should definitely invest them into covering your code base with unit tests. You can use any test runner you want on the CI. I personally prefer Jest due to good integration with React Native, and also snapshot testing is something that I really love. Another check we run on the JS environment is called Danger. It's a really nice tool. You just install it, you configure the Danger file. It contains a bunch of regulations for your PRs, like check if touched file has a unit test, or check if it has flow annotations, or actually check the amount of files being included in the PR. And basically, anything you want and the Danger allows you to check. It leaves the comment with feedback under each PR, and it takes off a big amount of work from the reviewers. And the last but not least is the only quality check we run on the native environments. I won't speak about it too long, since you already heard an amazing talk from yesterday. Basically, you can use Detox to perform E2E tests on your CI. Yeah, it might take some time, and you might need a good plan since it consumes a lot of resources. Maybe not a lot, but quite some. But having a well-tested code base with this kind of checks being run before merging into your master branch is a key to success. If you want to know more, especially about how to set up all these checks in your project, make sure to check out blog.callstack.com. And trust me, it's a well of knowledge. And yeah, if every if every test passes and PR gets accepted, we can merge it to the master, or to a development branch, or whatever convention do you follow. And this is where the fun begins and our deployment tasks are being triggered. To handle the automation of the beta deployment, we use Fastlane. Fastlane is an open source platform built by developers for developers, making all of the signing or deployment tasks really simple. It's built using Ruby, but the syntax of Fastfile is pretty straightforward. Let's start from code signing. It can be a painful aspect of iOS development. With Fastlane, it's just easy. Match is the implementation of code signing.guide concept. It creates all of the required certificates and provisioning profiles and stores them in the separate Git repository. You just store the URL in the file called match file, and every team member should have access to the repo and can use those credentials for code signing. Match also automatically repairs the broken and expired credentials. It's the easiest way to share the signing credentials across the team. Now is the time to build the app. On iOS side, it's done by a thing called Gym. It builds and packages iOS apps for you. It takes care of all the heavy lifting and makes it super easy to generate an IPA or app file. On the other hand, Gradle is here to execute any Gradle task you want. In our case, we want to execute assemble release to build the Android version of the app. After our IPA and APK files are created, we can upload them to the App Center or to the test flight, or actually any service you want to use for the beta distribution. And if you decide to use the App Center, there is the option to tell the Fastlane to send a link straight to the Slack. And it's really helpful for less technical people to test the releases as soon as the feature or fix is being deployed. The last chapter of my story will be about unleashing the full power of React Native. You remember when I spoke about the nature of the React Native and two separate realms, the native and the JavaScript. And often people see it as a weakness, but I will try to turn things around and use it as an advantage. Since the app is mostly written in JS, and the JS runs almost everywhere, we should use it smart and try to share things between the platforms. It doesn't mean iOS and Android, but also the web. We found out that having the separate NPM module with all the things we want to reuse between the web and mobile fits our needs a bit better than having a browser and the native projects as one. A lot of things could be shared. We went for UI components, typings, and GraphQL containers. But you could also share the things like unit tests, utilities, or the helpers. Sharing is great, however, you have to do it wisely. Don't try to force the universality when it's not needed. You can only make things worse and unmaintainable if you choose the wrong path. And remember, in the end, we are working with the native apps. There are a lot of great tools which helps you with the native development. Many of them are built into editors. That's why you should use the native IDEs rather than starting the app from the console. While it's perfectly fine to use the React Native CLI or Expo for smaller size apps, when it comes to writing the larger app, you should definitely go for Xcode and Android Studio. And it's not only about the native modules. I will try to briefly show you why. The reason is that they provide a lot of tools which helps you with debugging up in a convenient way. In Xcode, in example, head to the Show the Debug Navigator and choose the Inspecting the View hierarchy. On the left panel, you can check the native structure of the app. And on the right, there is a snapshot of your UI, which you can turn around to see the alignment on the Z-axis. Yeah, Android has a similar tool called the Layout Inspector. You can't use the 3D view here, but there is a nice properties table on the right. You can use them to debug all the things in your UI. And personally, I prefer it over the React Native built-in inspector in many cases. And yeah, UI is the one thing, but often, with the larger apps, you have to be aware of things like resource consumption, like CPU, network, memory, or the battery. And this is where Xcode's instruments steps in. As you can see, there are a lot of things which help you debug the app. If you want to learn how to use them in a good way, I recommend you checking out the lesson from iOS 11 course on the iTunes U. It's free, by the way. Android also comes with the solution to debug this kind of issues. On the bottom part of the Android Studio IDE, there are the few tabs. One of them is called Android Profiler, and this is where you can check the resource consumption of your app. Yeah, combining all of this leads to the success. Of course, almost all the mentioned tools has their alternatives, which could be even better in the different circumstances. But the goal is to be aware of all these things. Thank you very much.